Good evening. Thank you for showing up. So this is a book thing, so I'm not going to do any acting or dancing, which will be weird. I'll do a little dancing. I'm tickled pink that I got to write a book, and then I got to write another one, despite the first one. And I like this one very much. I hope you will too. When I came up with a list of great Americans to write about, the hard part was limiting the list. My editor tried to make me do 16, and although she was pregnant, I fought her with my fists. And now there are 21 chapters in the book. The baby is fine. Owen, we're friends. And one of the things I realized as I was compiling possible chapters was that I could selfishly use this work project to try and get to meet some of my heroes, and it worked. It totally worked. Among them was the amazing American writer George Saunders, who, thank you, who hails from Oak Forest originally, as we're about to hear a little bit about, and he's an absolute sweetheart. We spent a day in New York last winter. We went to a classically New York, or crappy, diner around the corner and took a little table for two halfway back along the wall in the shotgun layout of the joint. The waiter came quickly, took our orders for coffee, and moved on. I started my recorder and we dove in, but not before the waiter came back to take our food order. It being 9:30 a.m., we had both had our breakfasts. This coffee was intended merely to serve as the prologue to a very special lunch date. "If you're not going to eat, you can move to the back or you can be quick," barked the all-business bacon slinger. "We'll be quick," said George. I didn't want to be quick. I wanted to be slow and comfortable so that my interview with George could be as good written as possible. He is good of writing, and I wanted him to see that I could also too. Also, plus, my journalism is still additionally maturing, so I really needed time to take in the details of my surroundings, like a sponge, you know, that starts out dry, but then you get water on it, and it gets wet totally. It absorbs all the wetness. Metaphor. You know, so I could squeeze it then, the water of some stark truth into my piece, all over it. I inhaled, squinting with peepers, through my nose holes like in a sleuth simile. I looked left. Nothing of details would escape my looking. Salt. Pepper, what's up? Sugar and other sweeteners in paper squares, but longer than a square, like so many small-ass, monochromatic, or one-color flags from the nations of Diabetes Town. Their valor is weak, as evinced by the Eastery color choices of yellow, pink, and green fading, like the sense memory of my eyes sensing the colors in Aunt Dee's powder room in 1983, except she also had a shitload of lavender. To my right, a row of fucked up toadstools, except the stems were steel and the caps were like cushions for sitting on, like a seat stool stuck in the forest floor, except this was a real floor with linoleum covering like a really spread out hat. God damn, I thought. I'm gonna write the shit out of this thing. I slipped the waiter a 20 and said we'd be staying for a bit. His apron pocket sucked up that bill like a northern pike inhaling a night crawler. That's a fish. Eating a worm. But figurative. I felt like I had pokered in playing that dicey hand New York style. And the nice thing about a book deal is I can write that $20 off, so I guess the joke was on you, Joaquin. When George Saunders puts away some coffee and begins to rap, you had better pay attention. As he says himself, his thoughts come very quickly and explosively, and they'll turn on a dime. Given the level of creativity at which he operates, that made for an extremely intense conversation that was more delicious to me than many Reuben sandwiches I've known. I mean to say his language was goddamn delectable. I would expect a person packing the horsepower of intelligence that is exhibited in his story writing to be arrogant. I would also expect that person in a dialogue with me to eventually, or well soon, arrive at condescension, no matter how pure their motives at the outset. Mr. Saunders exhibits neither arrogance nor haughtiness. He is a sweetheart who happens to have a surgically incisive talent for writing, especially satire. Sorry if I'm blowing your cover, George, but I'm a writer, and I truth it up like that in a way that I can't help it because of that's how I play. I'm an animal. When George first arrived at Syracuse to study creative writing in graduate school, straight from Amarillo, where he had moved, he had the impression that his unusual, more rural background would be valued by the mostly urbane Ivy League classmates among which he found himself. He was mistaken. They derisively would say things like, "Amarillo, aren't there a lot of currency exchanges there?" George said, I kept trying to get it through to him that, like, these are people living in Amarillo. There's real life going on there. To me, he added, it was never anything but a joke to them, but to me, it was hurtful. I said, I know I'm right. I know that they're blind to this whole part of the country. And so indirectly, the Ivy League snobs helped George along as well by influencing him to galvanize his vision of the America he would feature in his stories, those living in the not inconsiderable acreage between the cities of tastemakers on either coast. Despite the erudition evident in his writing, one can't help but feel his feet and his point of view rooted among the people of Amarillo and Illinois and Colorado and so on. The people, capitalized. His gift for effective storytelling involves an uncanny ability to examine all sides of every question without judgment. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm a human being, so my default setting is to absolutely come down on one side of any issue, depending upon how the question affects my well-being. I believe that's called human nature. Because he loves us, George Saunders respects every opinion, leaving his own ego out of it, which makes even his scariest scenarios palatable. Another topic upon which we spent a good deal of Joaquin's $20 table time was a mutual appreciation for our redoubtable fathers. George shared this story, which seems to me to have laid the foundation for his ever-expanding generosity toward the human race. At Oak Forest High School in the 1970s, the food was apparently terrible. They had the hamburgers in the plastic bags that you would microwave and whatnot. So the students decided they would organize a walkout. We were very much in the thrall of Abby Hoffman and that whole thing, referencing the Chicago conspiracy trial of 1969 and 70. So everything was set to stick it to the man on a Friday morning, but the Thursday night previous, it occurred to George that maybe he would tell his dad about it, just in case. So he did. He honestly told his dad they were planning a walkout because the food was so bad. "Oh yeah, sure, that's great," said Dad. "Could I ask you something though?" George said to me, just like Columbo. Just one thing. You've let the principal know that this food is an issue, right? Nah, he wouldn't listen. Oh, okay. Although you're kind of setting yourself up a little bit, because if you walk out and you never tried to solve the problem, anyway, just think about it. So the next morning, George went in to speak with the principal, Toby Hightower. George, what's going on? George hadn't known that Principal Hightower even knew his name. He soldiered on and explained that the food in the cafeteria was really bad. Well, that's not acceptable. I'm going to appoint you head of a commission. Now, I want you to go out to, would 5 days be enough? 5 different school districts every Friday. You go out and pick a panel, 3 or 4 kids, and we'll send you out to these schools. You tell us which one you like and who you want to hire. Anyway, George said, that little move that my dad did there was like, don't assume your enemy is beneath you. Pretty badass dad skills right there. I began to understand how such a man as George Saunders could come to write stories with such a sincerely fair and balanced perspective, not to mention a measured examination of modern American society that requires backing up only the slightest step before the purview shows us to be clearly hilarious. Heads buried in our phones, scrutinizing who might like us, fashion trends swinging recently from heavily tattooed and stretching irreparable holes in the earlobe with gauge rings to lumbersexual, which apparently entails growing a beard, wearing flannel over pre-distressed work dungarees, and posing for photographs with an axe of any stripe. I have been mortified to be even tangentially mentioned by the press in association with this or any such fashion trend, but I can rest easy. I looked like that 20 years ago, and I'll still look like that 20 years from now, if my luck holds. Thank you. Just a quick confection for bon mot. Another person who I've admired my whole adult life is Jeff Tweedy and the music of the band Wilco. And thank you. I'm not in the band, but I've been seen with them, so I appreciate it. About a year and a half ago, he came and worked on Parks and Rec in an episode I was directing, which I'm about to read to you. Sorry for that upcoming redundancy. Getting this author thing down. But I was so excited because I'm such a fan of his, and then he was able to tolerate me as well, and we struck up a friendship, and so it was really exciting to include him in my book. And this is a fun little scene that happened on the day we met. Popular music, I'm also very fond of this sentence. Popular music nowadays is frequently quite vapid. Thank you. You've been great. Frequently quite vapid. It's fun, sure, and conducive to jiggling one's fanny, but the same platitudes are regurgitated in hit after hit with all the pop and flavor of a fine sugared breakfast cereal and with about as much sustenance. Tonight's gonna be a good night. I love you, especially your prominent hindquarters. Let's get ripped and party according to our rights as free fans of country music. Are just a few examples, verbatim, of songs that are making their authors millions of dollars on the music channels right now. A band like Wilco, however, can provide similar feelings of blood-rushing elation with the added bonus that their songs stimulate one's imagination. Both in the beginning and today, I try to take in a Wilco concert for my birthday whenever I can. I recall saying to my best friend Pat Roberts when we saw him at the Wiltern in LA a couple years ago that the thing I love about Wilco live is that their poetry and melodies are so pleasing and penetrating, but then they say, "Oh, now would you like us to crank out some throbbing, evocative rock and roll in which you can lose yourself in waves of bodily pleasure?" And then they deliver exactly that. But as much as I love feeling the visceral rush of rock and roll through my blood veins, it always comes back to the lyrics, which recalls for me Wendell Berry's adulation of the human brain's ability to embroider words and images in its imagination more poignantly than any sensation that can ever be grasped in the light of day. So many of Tweedy's verses are wrought of an inscrutable poetry that leaves the listener no choice but to interpret it personally, which leads to inspiration and a much more personal mutual experience between author and recipient. A favorite of mine: "Remember to remember me, standing still in your past, floating fast like a hummingbird." You guys fucking good. So now you should have a pretty clear idea of my admiration for this artist. Sorry, can you see my erection? It's unconnected. It's a blood sugar thing. Perhaps you are considering your own strategy to ensnare him in a marriage of your very own. Get in line, sailor. Imagine then, if you will, my excitement when Jeff Tweedy came to work on Parks and Recreation in an episode I was directing, no less. Sorry, guys. We met. In fact, we embraced. Jeff was a little nervous about acting on camera, which makes sense. You ask him to perform any piece of music and he'll tear into it like a seasoned cleric, but take away the security of his superpower, music, and he's understandably more uncertain about what to do. Luckily, he had two beautiful super friends to guide him through the scene, in Amy Poehler and Chris Pratt. After a couple of warm-up takes, making us laugh behind the camera, he was confidently nailing his bits. In a sublime example of what made Chris Pratt such a genius on that quality program, he was to sing a song in the scene and play guitar, and then get Jeff's character to join in on the song. Well, naturally, Jeff warmed right into the singing and even began to harmonize with Chris, which was one of the dreamiest scenarios I could ever have imagined. Jeff, Chris, and Amy being hilarious, then Jeff Tweedy starts singing just like Jeff Tweedy, and they'll just keep going until the director yells cut, except the director is me, so we'll do this all night long. Magnificent. It's good to be the king. Except every time Jeff would chime in, Pratt would immediately stop the song and say, no, wrong, listen to me. I would think, oh, Chris, Jeff is singing. I would like to hear him singing out of that hole in his beautiful face. But at the same time, it was so goddamn funny that Chris's character, Andy Dwyer, would unwittingly commit such a sacrilege. He even became visibly frustrated that Jeff just couldn't get it right. Perhaps Pratt's general secret was that he would simply discern what would be the one thing that his Andy shouldn't do in any given scenario, and then he would do exactly that thing with the relentless enthusiasm of a puppy. Whatever the source of his alchemy, I could never get enough of it, and it certainly served that night to allow Tweedy and all present to enjoy himself. Thank you. And now, I would like to welcome to the stage young Mark Bazer, the host of the interview show, who is going to grill me with questions. Thank you. Terrific hijinks.
Yeah.
In jazz, they call that hot licks.
Did you really slip the waiter a 20 in the diner in New York?
You fucking A right, I did.
So you can do that. I've seen that in the movies, and you're in the movies.
Yeah, man. It was freezing out.
Yeah.
And we went into this super shitty diner where it was warm and there's coffee. And the guy's like, order food or get out.
Because it's New York, and they want you in and out.
Yeah. And you think, oh, because you want to use this table to make money, so you give them money.
But it works.
And then he's cool. He's like, all right.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to do it.
And if George and I ordered a full breakfast, it probably would have been $13. So Joaquin was totally cool.
So the excerpts were very funny, but the book is both funny and also, I would say, deeply serious about a lot of things that you believe about.
You son of a bitch.
I can't help it. I laughed a lot, but I also felt.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was my aim.
Yeah. The title, Gumption, is a great word that I don't think I've heard for years. But I looked it up, and it combines both initiative and common sense. And those seem to get at two of the values that make all these heroes your heroes.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I engineered the title backwards. My editor, it was her idea to do a list of great Americans. And then I said, oh, I love this. And we came up with, a huge list. And then we started paring it down. And once I got down to, a couple dozen, I said, all right, smart guy, now how are you going to turn this in? What's the glue here? Awesome dudes and ladies that I love. But pretty quickly I was like, oh, it's their gumption. Like, that's exactly the flavor that I want to put across to my readership is, here's why these people inspired me and why I think you'll love what they do or did or what it is about them.
One thing that comes up a few times is that you obviously have great love for this country, but you talk about how these people use freedom, and you can use freedom in many ways, but they use freedom to make the world and make this country a more decent place.
Yeah, that's kind of the idea is like, I love that we are alive in a time that's much better. I gotta get my Donahue on.
Then you gotta go out into the audience.
Old people.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Were you in Chicago when they filmed Donahue? Were you living here?
I don't know.
I don't know how you would.
Yeah, you couldn't get there from where I was. I know that. I was here in the mid-'90s, from like 93 to 97. Was I about to answer a question?
I don't know. Decency.
Decency.
And Donahue.
And Donahue. And common sense and initiative. Did we get past that question?
No, we're still there.
Yes is the answer.
Okay, good. I'll move on to question 2. I gotta say, this has got to be. And
I know what I was going to say. Sorry, real quick.
Go ahead.
I'm happy to be alive in a time when these issues are coming up. Like I sort of started out the book kind of wanting to bitch about the ignorance of American patriotism that I feel like we've gotten so comfortable because we live in such luxury. Look at these fucking boots, for Christ's sake. No holes. And so we're like, this country's amazing. I can get a quarter pounder at every corner. And it allows us to not have to see the rest of the world. And I include myself in this. I was like, maybe we're getting a little lazy, and we need to still pay attention to the gumption that started this country. Like, hey, we should try and be decent to everybody. And at the time, it was these white dudes that were like, okay, let's draw up a paper. Should we get rid of our slaves? No, that's not possible.
Yeah. Decency has its limits.
Yeah, I mean, they wrote it into their wills. They're like, when I die, you can free my slaves.
Well, Washington did that.
Yeah, and his was actually, I think, when his wife died. Like it's understandable on one hand, but on the other hand, it's really passing the buck. Where it's like, this is going to be a shit show. So you kids, you're welcome.
I gotta say, it might be the only book that's ever been written, and I think that will ever be written, that begins with a chapter on George Washington and concludes with a chapter on Conan O'Brien.
I'll be if this is the only book that ever begins and ends that way, I'll eat my hat.
You think it's the first in a series of many?
I just broke the ice.
It's a genre in the making.
It is.
So connect those two.
Well, frankly, I've known Conan and been lucky enough to be buddies with him for a long time, maybe 10 or 12 years, and I thought I knew him very well, but when I sat down to interview him and ask him some of these questions that I thought were softballs, I was like, hey, how about kids today and their phones, right? Give me some comedy. And he wouldn't. He would give me Gandhi-like pith and sagacity. And I actually teared up a couple times where I was like, Conan, I love you, I admire you. I did not expect like this kick-ass flavor of wisdom from you, but there it was. And the thing about Conan is he's really good at masking his true golden nature with like, I'm just a clumsy puppet up for hijinks.
Sure.
And even I buy it, you know, when in my first book I talked briefly about one time we went for a bike ride in Seattle, and he showed up, and he's an avid cyclist, so he showed up in like a cyclist outfit, slathered in sunscreen, and I took a look at him and I was like, you are a goddamn athlete. Like, you're a beautiful Olympic athlete. He somehow tailors his suits to look thinner and more lanky, but he's actually a total Viking badass. I think I say in the book, he's like a threesome baby of Tilda Swinton, a Viking, and a stork. Which, if you gave a young George Washington, could also be described the same way.
Yeah.
Conan
and often was, I
yes.
believe. Yeah.
Biographers, that old chestnut. But they're both these incredible, intrepid leaders that sort of looked at the world around them and used the gifts they'd been given to go as far as possible and to sort of spread decency to as many people as they could. George Washington did it through politics, but in researching him, I was fascinated to learn, now that I know slightly more about politics than I did when we learned about him in school, that he, in the history of our country, is the only president who's ever remained neutral. He was the only guy, and so he was always unanimously elected every time he was put into office, even when it was the general of the continental military to his presidencies, because everyone knew, even if they hated his guts, that he'd listen to everybody and make the fairest decision. And immediately after Washington, they were like, okay, fuck that.
And he walked away. Washington walked away from it all, too.
He did, and he tried for decades. He was like, you know what, you guys, I want to go home to my farm and my wife. And they were like, come on, man, you're the only fair person in the history of our country.
You've got a quote in the book where even King George III admired Washington.
When we won the revolution, everyone, the big fear, you know, they had just like fought this war that there's no way we could have won, and we did, because we're goddamn Americans. and everyone was scared because Washington was so all-powerful that he could have said, okay, now fuck this independence. I'm king of America, and you will all bow before me. He could have done that. Like, he was in charge. And he said, you know what? I'm going to resign. I'm going to abdicate all power. And King George read about that, and he said, if he can do that, he's the greatest man in the world. And he did. I mean, he had that propensity for common sense, that he was like, I'm not going to use this power to fuel my ego. I'm just going to try and keep it fair for everybody.
So the first few chapters, the heroes that you choose, you got Washington, you got Ben Franklin, you got James Madison, and you got Frederick Douglass. And I bet if you asked everybody in the country, 95%, let's say, maybe a little lower, would say, okay, yeah, I'm with you on that. But then you get further and further into the book, and you get into people like Yoko Ono and Barney Frank, and something happens. These are more obviously modern figures. So why is it that in this country, beyond the mythologizing of the founding fathers, that we have great agreement on what went on our heroes from the past, but when we get to now, this country is completely splintered?
That's one of the themes in the book that I've noticed in myself. You know, I vote in a certain way. I usually lean towards the Jon Stewart Colbert side of things, but there's also I have a lot of respect for the libertarian point of view. Like, whatever I do in my bedroom, if I'm not hurting anybody or anybody's property, you can go fuck yourself. And there's a lot to be said for that. But I noticed as I grow older that I began to feel like I was in a rut, or that my voting, my politics, were yet another part of the consumerism that we all suffer from so blindly. Where I was like, I feel like those of us that like, you know, that point of view, we turn on John Oliver, and he tells us who's an asshole. And then the other half of the country turns on O'Reilly or Fox News.
Turn on the assholes.
Yeah, they turn on the assholes, and they say the same thing. And I was like, I feel like we're sort of being, that's just another way we're being kept in this comfortable matrix-like rut, where we're being bred as blue and red voters. And I was like, how will we ever see improvement if we all just remain so partisan? And that's I'm not smart enough to answer that question, but it's a question I wanted to pose, because I wish somehow that, like, maybe Tom Cruise could pull it off.
Why isn't he one of the people in the book?
Why don't him and Nader get together? That could be the answer.
Ticket?
Yeah. If Cruise would bring down Scientology, he could get a groundswell, I think, to land in the White House. It's up to you, Tomcat. Talk to me, Goose. But, you know, it's a question that I wanted to pose for that very reason, and that's why it takes somebody like Yoko, who, growing up, I suffered under the same misapprehension as most people, where when you say Yoko Ono, they're like, oh, negative vibe, the lady who broke up. I don't know what else she does. What is she? Some New York artist, but she's the lady who broke up the Beatles. And I said that, and my wife is a very progressive and smart person, and she's a great curator of art. 15 years ago, she said to me, we're going to an art opening of Yoko Ono in Santa Monica. And I said, the terrible lady who broke up the Beatles? And she said, oh, I'm so sorry that I let you put your penis inside me. That's a quote. You can fact check that. Not the last time she said that. But she then explained Yoko's art to me, and she had the Grapefruit book and a couple other books, and I immediately was like, holy shit, I am besotted with Yoko. She's amazing. And then we went and met her, and we became friends, and like, she's wonderfully eccentric and playful and foxy and like vibrant, and she's in her 70s, and she's like a kick-ass rock star and artist. So I became a big fan of hers, and as I've learned more and more about her, I've said, it's so criminal that that she's not a national hero, and instead she has this like taint from when the Beatles broke up because we needed a scapegoat because there wasn't going to be another Abbey Road. And so that choosing Yoko was in part incentivized by wanting to vindicate her in the public eye, like to be like, you guys, you should take a second look at Yoko because she spent her whole life doing good for us.
Yeah.
Like, even though she saw this messianic figure who was her husband and our favorite musician of all time gunned down in front of her, she grieved and was like, I'm just going to continue on our message for the rest of my life. And she's astonishing. And so I think because politics and taste are so easily categorized by like the country music, right? The sort of old guard Bible, you know, the cadre of priests and nuns that are gathered around Governor Mike Pence as he signs a Religious Freedom Act, where you're like, do you realize you have a group of Catholic Klansmen like looming over you while you sign this evil, like discriminatory legislation? We can see you, dude. That's going on, but the thing is, they think they're doing the right thing, and so instead of say, hey, you're jerks, you're doing the wrong thing, I want to say, hey, you guys, just stop and think about this. I understand that you're dealing with like age-old traditions and you're acting out of fear, but you're being dicks to a certain group of people, and that's not cool. Like that's what we'd say in our country. So you can still be Catholic and like do lots of good, but you also have to be cool to everybody. That's the rule.
Don't be a dick, though.
Don't be a dick. That was my proposed subtitle.
No, you grew up in Manuka, small. You write in the book that it was a small conservative town, but it was also a town where you learned hard work. You learned great values from your parents. So I guess my question is, and now you live in Hollywood, which is painted as the exact opposite of that. Tell us where the common ground is. Tell us, is there the ability for everybody to say, okay, I'm going to embrace Yoko, but let me tell you about my hero.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think I've lived in Chicago and New York and LA, and no matter where you live, you know, to make a figure of speech, you find your Manuka, Illinois, wherever you are, and you're drawn to people who share some sort of similar values, and that's how I came up with all these people. I mean, when I got to college, I had much more acculturated friends hand me Laurie Anderson and hand me, you know, my wife taught me about Yoko. Great actor who has passed away named Leo Burmester first handed me Wendell Berry's short stories when we were working at Steppenwolf. And so that's what I'm trying to do is like, I'm not as funny as Aziz, I'm not as good as a writer as George Saunders, but I have a book deal. So, let me talk about George Saunders.
Well, one of the things that comes through throughout the book is that your life is continually, very consciously trying to learn new things, which everybody does, but you're very much like, this is what I'm doing, and I want to explore these people and learn about them, and I'm going to do it in a book so I can make some money.
Well, it's something I've learned, and I'm getting away with it like crazy, is like, my life is fortunately very busy, and so things will happen to me like, it's driving me crazy that I can't learn how to play this song on a guitar. And then what I learned is I just have to put it into one of my jobs, either a film or TV show or writing a book. And by choosing this subject matter, I was able to read so much that I didn't have time to read because it was my job. Yeah. And so, in a sense, I always talk about continuing to learn things, partially to remind myself to continue to learn things, because otherwise, I'm a human being. I could very easily just become obsessed with Netflix and ice cream and become a fat weirdo. That is one path to happiness, but I think it's a narrow path.
So I got shown the iPad, which means that we're getting near. But
Oh,
I have a couple. I'm going to go a little longer. I've got a couple questions, and one is, even with your admiration for John Oliver, Jon Stewart, you talk about how, at the end of the day, that kind of humor is about calling people out. There is some, hey, you suck for saying that or doing that.
Right.
Whereas Parks and Rec and other works that you've done, it really kind of mixes in I think, a wonderful way, humor and love. And so normally we think of humor as, again, satirizing, taking down people. So talk about the other side, that comedy can be all-inclusive.
I do feel that, and I could be wrong, like that's the other thing I noticed is like whenever people want to bitch or tear something down, it's fun to join in and be like, yeah, I hate those rap records or whatever. And it's fun to commiserate about hip hop in general, but
Well, you say in the book that you know some rap songs by heart.
I do. We don't have time for. I could run you through the entirety of "Jam on It" by Nucleus.
I think we might have time for that.
It's one of those things that's in the file that can't be emptied. Like I'd much rather have some King Lear in there. Just kidding. Both iambic pentameter. Fun fact. I do feel with the most trusted news source today, that being the comedy news program, I do feel like they're more fair. Like they'll call out Obama if he stumbles, whereas the assholes I don't feel are fair that way. What I say in the book is like, but is it helping to like tune into Stewart, who I love, but it's not helping me have a more open mind, I don't think. But I do think they do a better job of calling out actions, not people, or not partisanship. But then I learned on Parks and Rec from my boss, Mike Schur, and Amy Poehler, and the whole gang. I spent those 7 years having a blast and really enjoying my work, but also learning along with everybody. And I dedicate the book to Mike Schur, and I say, for teaching me that we can still be very funny while saying I love you. And that was such an awesome lesson, because if I can fall down and like get up to my japes, but not be a jerk to anybody, it's just karmically wonderful, you know? And I love that kind of television, and Mike openly says that, you know, shows like MASH and Cheers, the kind that make you laugh and love these characters, but then also make you cry uncontrollably when something goes wrong for them, or when something beautiful happens to them, like they're served 2 steaks. That was just a wonderful lesson to me, and it really lightened up my own point of view. And through the exploration and talking to the figures in this book, it also made me much more hopeful. You know, Conan put it very well. He said, it's easy to get frustrated because there's so many things to be frustrated about, always in the world, but it used to be worse. We're slowly getting better. I mean, all these things are in the news now. Like same-sex marriage is now in the news. Weed is going to be legal soon. Thank God. Like it, so we can focus on some real shit that needs solving.
I don't know if focus is the right word there.
Maybe, yeah. But that was a beautiful lesson that I'm. Oh, hang on one sec. Go ahead. You want to grab that?
You don't usually get the 2 ring.
Mom,
How much time do we have left?
I'm an asshole. Just kidding, guys.
Can I ask you about wood?
Sure.
Yeah.
Bet your ass.
We bought a bookshelf for my son from Pottery Barn, and it came, and we had to quarantine it because it off-gassing so much, and it just got me thinking that what we usually talk about the food movement. Everybody's used to that, and how the food we usually eat is such crap. But talk about the wood and the materials that so much of this country uses, and how it's just, they say it's wood. It said real wood on the box.
Sure, it looks like wood.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's representative of everything we're consuming. I mean, we're being sold shit on almost every level, and it's a weird thing because as a woodworker, I think being a conservationist kind of goes hand in hand, which sounds like it wouldn't make sense. My wife recently accused me in a funny way of being a tree killer, but I've never felled a tree for wood. There's so many trees coming down naturally, or old barns coming down. There's more wood than we can use, so everything we build out of is reclaimed, and we want more trees to grow and live and become old growth, because then it becomes amazing wood. But we in the crazy headlong effort to sell us all cheaper and cheaper products, we have sent all of our jobs overseas, and we're making stuff, these huge catalog companies, in a way that I think has become purposefully disposable, so that in 18 months you have to buy another fucking Pottery Barn bookshelf. And it's become okay. Like, even our cars, you scratch your fender pulling into the garage, and you're like, oh great, now I have to get a new car. And shoes, things that used to last people a lifetime, and if it didn't, you'd take it to the cobbler down over in Old Town, and they'd fix it up for you. And that's something that there's a lot of in the Wendell Berry chapter. Like, by removing that kind of consuming from my life, I've just bought so much more time. Like, I have a Ford F-250 diesel Super Duty pickup that I've had since 2004, and it's as beautiful and magnificent as the day I bought it. It's beat to shit, but it's not a coffee table. It's meant to do work. And the thing I love the most about it is, since I've been driving it, I maintain it, I keep it running, so I don't have to go to the mechanic, I don't have to look on Yelp for anything, I don't have to shop for vehicles, I don't have to pay attention to...
Have you ever been on Yelp?
Sure, if I'm in a strange city, my habit, because I tour a lot, is like, best ribs in Toledo. And more often than not, one of the first things it'll send you to is like a Yelp thing of a restaurant. I'm not crazy about Yelp.
We should stop talking.
I don't know that. I don't know that much about it. I'm bad at those things, and I'm happy to be bad at them. I'd rather ask a dude at the gas station, like, who has good ribs.
Let's talk real quickly before we turn it over to the audience about your time here in Chicago. Talk about the Defiant Theater.
Oh,
in
return
about
of
30
erection.
seconds. Yeah.
Well, we started at the U of I in Champaign-Urbana. A group of us formed this theater company. We moved up here, and it was a wonderfully irreverent and vibrant and daring company for about 11 years. I was here for the first 3 seasons, and we just had a wonderful time working our asses off for free, doing some of the best work of our lives. And the Chicago theater scene allows that in a way that I've found in no other city. The theater community here is so supportive and generous, and it was so depressing when I moved to LA, the largest collection of actors and writers in the country. There's nothing like the theater scene here. And I was like, what's the matter with you people? And they were like, we're trying to get on Baywatch, man.
And you met Amy Poehler while you were in Chicago, but you guys, you were telling me off stage that you operated in different worlds.
We did, yeah. We met because our friends lived together, so we would kind of party together. I was suffering from an idiocy that straight theater, at least in me. I mean, I was this like farm kid that discovered I could study theater in college, and I was like, I've become a thespian. Dead fucking serious about theater. And I still like making people laugh, but I also love Pinter and, you know, Chekhov and all the snotty stuff, which is great. I mean, but I was a snob about it. So when I met Amy, and I had heard vaguely of Second City, and I knew that kind of what comedy was in their world, but I had absolute disregard for it because I was a serious theater artist. And so when Amy and I would talk, I'd be like, I might as well have been a zoologist and she was an astronaut. I was like, all right, well, good luck with your launch. I remember, whatever, the solipsistic tunnel vision of the theater artist. She told me what she did, and I was like, you make stuff up in a bar? Great. Good luck with that career path. I was like 36. I started doing stuff with her in New York at her UCB theater. And only then I was there and all these great SNL people, we were doing shows. And I was like, oh, now I get it from 15 years ago that you knew that was the way to SNL. God damn it.
And now you obviously did Parks and Rec, but you're also doing comedy shows. Off stage, I asked you, I said, is there anything I can ask you about? And then you started talking about a show that you just did about your balls and your butthole.
That's right.
Yeah. You can tell the whole audience.
It's a show with a lot of anatomy. Did anyone see us at the Chicago Theater a couple weeks ago? Thank you. My wife and I just finished a 23-city tour of our show, Summer of '69, no apostrophe. Thank you. You guys are readers, I can tell. Super fun. It's a super filthy show, but surprisingly sweet and romantic. Mostly about my balls and some parts of her vagina that you might not have heard of before. And it's just a really fun show. We toured it all over. We're going to tour it more. We'll hope to come back because we love doing it so much that after we did it a few times, we said, let's milk this goddamn show until no one will come. And then we'll shoot it and see if anybody will put it on their channel.
Well, let's take some questions from the audience. Anybody got some questions for Nick?
Who is your favorite president?
Who is your favorite president? Oh boy, Theodore Roosevelt. I mean, number 26. There's no getting around it.
Who's in the book?
He's in the book, and he had some attitudes that are questionable, although I think more forgivable in his day and age. But all things considered, if we're talking about gumption, he just can't be beat. He did things. I won't tell the whole story, but he was campaigning once in Milwaukee, and he took a bullet, literally took a bullet in the tit, and then spoke for 90 minutes. And when you just think about the current presidential race, and if Huckabee got a splinter, he'd be shut down for 2 weeks.
We got one over here. Here's the mic.
What's it like to be married to Megan Mullally?
What's it like to be married to Megan Mullally? It's pretty ridiculous. There's on one level we are two people married, and so we're maintaining a relationship. So mundane things like any roommates or siblings, like, honey, can you please put the cap on the toothpaste, or what have you. Were you in the refrigerator? We're maintaining a domestic relationship. That's one level, but then it's Megan Mullally. So I get to look at her, anytime I fucking want to. And I get to, her vagina is my legal property. I mean, familiar with the verb spelunk? And honestly, the first time I sat in an audience, she was singing with the Seattle Gay Men's Choir. And this was 2000, and we had started dating, and she was like, "You want to come with me while I sing in an opera house?" And I sat in this audience, and I hadn't heard her sing live. And when I heard her, I just looked around like, you're all asking yourselves the same question. Who's the lucky son of a bitch going home with that lady tonight? And that jackass is sitting right here. And I still just feel that way. I'm such a huge fan of her, and so mostly it feels super lucky.
Right over here.
As a woodworker and an artisan and someone who obviously appreciates craftsmanship, do you have any kind of opinion on the sort of loss of the skilled trades and like vocational tech in the U.S. right now?
Sure, yeah. I talk about that in the book in a few of the chapters. That's something Wendell Berry speaks very eloquently about how since the Industrial Revolution, the notion of work has been vilified and tainted as something beneath us, because that's how they sold us vacuum cleaners. They said, you should put your feet up. You're above such work. You should pay laborers to put in that fence or take care of your lawn or do all of these things. So that by now, anything that requires work or getting one's hands dirty or using tools or breaking a sweat, we're like, ugh. No, I want to stay in the air conditioning and play Call of Duty. And so that's something that I try to talk about a lot. I grew up a laborer, which became my woodworking, and it's something that now I don't need to do anymore, but I cling to it tenaciously because it allows me to feel alive. I mean, if I was just a person with an iPhone traveling around like making people laugh, I'd feel like a douche. For me, that's part of my humanity, is that I can affect the physical world around me. There's a great book by Peter Korn called Why We Make Things and Why It Matters. And he speaks so beautifully about when you make a table, not by making the choice to make your own table or your bookshelves for your kid, that's one choice. But then the choices you make, I'm going to make it out of walnut, I'm going to route the edge, or I'm going to do this groovy thing, or I'm going to try this fastener idea, or I'm just going to stack it up with bricks. All of those choices, what you're doing, beyond making a practical choice, you're curating your life. And you're saying, I can build my life around me, for me and my family, with these choices. And you can do that with everything you make, whether it's lasagna, or a knit cap, or write a song, or make love, or make semen. These are all choices that we make. And
In my defense, Nick, you had to assemble the bookshelf that you received.
I get it. That's where they get you. They make you feel like you're accomplishing something.
It took 4 hours.
And you are, but it's pap. When you're done, you've built a house of turds. and so I'm one of there. Mike Rowe has a great platform. Like, there are many of us, and it's something I will keep trumpeting. We need to. It's insane. Cutting things like arts and the trades from our educational system is just stupid. I mean, it's like inviting China to take over our country. Because if nobody can weld, then we have, like, hello, Tokyo? I need an axle.
Center section.
Okay.
Your performance on Parks and Rec seems so effortless. I'm wondering if you can share some examples of acting challenges that you had on the show that you had to overcome in a way that we might not have seen through your performance?
That's a good question.
That's a great question. And thank you for the compliment. That's just good editing, is what that is. Easily the biggest challenge, which is a delicious thing to have be your biggest challenge at work, was don't laugh at the funniest motherfuckers ever assembled in front of a TV camera. That was my job. I mean, me specifically, and I'm so grateful that I finally got a part where they understood that I could get a laugh with my mouth shut. So they it eventually became a game where they were like, okay, Amy, make Nick break. And if I was having a good day and I could keep my shit together through like 3 takes, then she would get pissed. And you could just see her in her a glint would be like, oh, you think you're not gonna laugh at Amy Poehler? And she would destroy me. She would just decimate me. And it was so delicious. Like, the longer, like being tickled by your favorite uncle, like the longer you can hold when you finally release, it's fucking so good. And it got to be like that when, whenever it would happen organically, but in any given situation where we'd throw to Pratt, in some situation, you know, be like, Andy, what do you think? I eventually had to like turn away and bite my mustache and like to get through it. That was the hardest. Also, working with my wife, who just, you know, she pushes my buttons as a rule. I mean, she has her finger on my button. And so to do a scene with her right here and have her like just rub me, or there was one scene when I had my eyebrows burned off in the courtyard, and she's talking to me, and she was just slowly rubbing her tits up and down on my arm. And part of my brain was saying, how did you get here? You're being paid so handsomely for Megan Mullally to rub her tits on you while she's being super funny in your face. And then part of my brain was like, just keep it together. Just keep it together. But you'll notice, I mean, there are many, you know, they often have to feature Megan in those scenes because I'm like making that I'm not gonna laugh face. Thanks very much for your patience and thanks for having me, sir.
Nick Offerman, everyone.